The history of the Marshall House Hotel. The Marshall House Hotel on Broughton Street is one of the oldest hotels in Savannah, Georgia, and with that distinction comes a colorful past filled with enchanting charm. The Marshall House has retained some of the original architectural features, such as the beautiful brick walls and glamorous staircase. One thing that makes the Marshall House so unique is that unlike other historic hotels in Savannah, the Marshall House was not originally a house, but was built with the specific purpose of being a hotel. Mary Marshall built the hotel in 1851 on land that she'd inherited from her father, Gabriel Lever, who was a French cabinet maker. The Marshall House is widely considered by architectural historians to be the finest structure Mary Marshall ever built. During the Civil War, the Marshall House was occupied by the Union and used as a hospital until the end of the war. It was also used twice more as a hospital during the yellow fever epidemics of the 19th century, and many believe ghosts still roam the 165-year-old structure. When the hotel was restored in the late 1990s, workers were replacing some damaged floorboards downstairs when they found human remains. The area became a crime scene, but soon it was learned that the downstairs had once been the hospital's surgery room, leading historians to believe that the bones which were discovered came from the amputated limbs of Civil War soldiers. The Marshall House is well aware of their reputation for paranormal activity. Eerie ghostly occurrences include faucets that turn on and off, lights that inexplicably flicker, electronic items powering themselves, toilets suddenly overflowing for no apparent reason, and disembodied voices that echo throughout the halls. On the fourth floor in the hallway, loud noises are known to take place during the early morning hours, like the thundering of a heavy object crashing to the ground. Also, doorknobs to the rooms tend to wiggle as if someone is attempting to enter the room. I'm not sure of the exact intentions this impolite ghost has, but it's a safe bet that it's not the kind of room service you would want. One guest recalled, "A room to be wary of." 306. The loud hall noises in the middle of the night happen on the fourth floor where we just happen to be staying. I've lived in many haunted houses, but Marshall House creeped me out completely. I loved it there, but I could not rest. Yes, it is old and noisy, but there's way more going on there than meets the eye. I know others have experienced things too. There is also a ghostly cat, but I never seen it myself. There happened to be another hotel guest who said she did. But what else can you really expect from a city built on top of dead bodies? One day, a young girl who was staying at the hotel with her father pointed to the picture of Mary Marshall and told her father that she had seen the lady in the hallway. While we don't know exactly what the father said, you can imagine his surprise when his young daughter told him she'd seen the ghost of a woman who has been dead for decades. Perhaps they didn't stay at the Marshall House for too much longer. Guests have also reported hearing the distinct sound of an old-fashioned typewriter coming from the former room of author Joel Chandler Harris, who is best known for his collection of Uncle Remus stories. Is the spirit of Joel Chandler Harris still typing away, intent on creating another tale about Uncle Remus? Others tell of a dapper gentleman reading a book by a window, a lady in white flowing through the hallways, and another ghostly woman who haunts the ladies' restroom, and on occasion she will lock the stall. Let's just hope it is a ghost, and not some Chuck Berry copycat with a serious fetish problem. Yes, the Marshall House is known to be a noisy place due to its wood floors and high ceilings. But there are countless tales of the apparitions of small children and the sounds of crying babies that have been regularly reported by guests at the famous hotel. The spirits of these children are known to linger around the Marshall House, as the laughter and playful voices of the children can be heard within the building at any given moment. Sometimes these ghostly children can be seen skipping, running and playing games through the hallway, their apparitions as a physical form. During the night, sounds of marbles and rubber balls can be heard rolling and bouncing in the hallways. Not exactly modern kids' games, but if you were to take a peek out in the hall, most likely you would not see anything. No kids, no balls, no marbles, leaving you to wonder if you imagined the entire thing completely. A guest named Christopher recalls, "My fiancé and I stayed at the Marshall House for one night over the summer. At the time, we didn't know its history and just saw that it was a cool hotel for a pretty inexpensive price point on Expedia. That night, laying in bed and watching TV, we heard what we assumed were families out in the hall. It sounded a lot like children running around and people talking very loudly, which was odd for 12 a.m. However, when I looked, there wasn't anyone there. We heard the same sounds intermittently until we fell asleep. I wouldn't call the experience scary, just weird. There's an infamous story about a mother and son who stayed at the Marshall House Hotel. The boy's mother was in the bedroom and her son in the bathroom, playing and talking to himself. Her son then came out of the bathroom crying, and she asked him what was wrong. And he replied, "The boy bit me." Confused, she asked, "What boy?" He then said, "The one who I was playing with in the bathroom." The boy's mother quickly went to look in the bathroom and didn't see the boy of whom her son spoke of. But when she looked at her son's arm, she found that there was a bite mark. All the color immediately washed away from her face. She later found out that this was not the first case of strange bites at the Marshall house. There have been other guests who have been inflicted with a child-sized bite mark that was done with so much force that each time a bruise was left, and each time the bite mark was on a spot of the body that would have been impossible to reach unless said person was a contortionist. Other haunting encounters from anonymous guests, and because personal paranormal accounts are undeniably the best, we've gathered a few of our favorites and listed them below, completely unedited for your pleasure. It's safe to say that these brave souls got more than they bargained for when staying at the haunted Marshall House, but are you? We recently spent several nights at the Marshall House and had a couple of experiences. Unexplained noises and smells in our room and outside in the hallway, which brought about some unsettling, eerie feelings. We were told the floor and room was haunted. Our room was on the second floor with a courtyard view. We too heard the marble rolling sound, and hubby swears he was awakened by what he said sounded like a child giggling in the sitting area. But when he turned on the light, nothing was there, and he just figured that perhaps he was just dreaming. We really enjoyed our stay, but there was an overall sense of spookiness, and it was as though we were waiting for something to happen or appear. Probably mostly due to all the hype that Savannah has about being a very haunted city. I never got much sleep while we were there. I always felt very uneasy and utterly creeped out at night in my guts and could not rest. Did hear some strange noises in the hall late at night around 3 a.m. or so, what sounded like a hard rubber ball rolling along the hallway, and bouncing also what sounded like a marble rolling and bouncing also, a very loud crash in the hall. 3 a.m.ish, almost like a body falling and hitting the floor, and no one was out there. We also heard what sounded like walking around on the floor above us, but there is only the roof. Also very unnerving feeling of being touched while in bed at night, and I was completely awake, touched on the inside of my lower leg, ankle, and buttock area. This made me nearly jump out of bed more than once. On the last night we stayed there, we noticed a strange smell in the room, and the bathroom that we could find no source for. It was almost like a burned flesh smell combined with a slight sewery odor. Would like to hear from more people who have strange otherworldly experiences at this location. The ghosts of the Reed House Hotel. At night, the Reed House Hotel glimmers under the starry night, a beacon to all who wish to waltz through its doors and discover what Chattanooga offered during the illustrious Gilded Age of the early 1900s. Silver sconces, elaborately prepared meals in the famous Porterhouse restaurant. But make no mistake, for as beautiful as the Reed House is, it possesses an ugly past that stretches back over 160 years. And today, this haunted hotel bears the scare and the spirits to prove it. You can't have a historic hotel without a few ghosts lurking about. This is a true fact, we promise you. And should you be curious about the Reed House Hotel, know that its haunted legacy is one for the books. For many guests who stay at this illustrious Chattanooga hotel, their paranormal reports often sway to the standard ghostly activity, cold breezes, shadow figures out of the corner of their eye, and strange noises in the dead of the night. Others, however, are awakened by something a little more spine-tingling. In fact, One guest staying at the Reed House came forward and claimed that an odd thing happened in the middle of the night in our room. The toilet gurgled and sounded like it was flushing when nobody was in there. I joked that it must have been the ghost. A joke it may have been, but it's quite likely that was exactly who had woken this poor guest up. Other guests have claimed to have experienced similar supernatural activity, as well as seeing ghostly soldiers roaming the halls of the hotel's fourth floor. We can only assume that these shadowy spirits are none other than the residual energy of the soldiers, who may have spent their last moments at the Reed House, when it operated as a Civil War hospital. But it is one specific room at this historic hotel that strikes the fear into many room 311. The haunted room, 311 inches. In 2004, the Tennessean reported that guests staying at the Reed House Hotel swear to have felt her presence, and some say they have seen her. Those who have stayed in room 311 have reported to the desk in the late hours of the night complaining of a strange feeling in the room, and claim they cannot fall asleep. Who is the Tennessean referring to, though? None other than Annalisa Netherly, whose spirit is said to haunt the Reed House's room 311. According to local lore, Annalisa's lover first brought her to the hotel sometime in the 1920s, while she was still alive, of course. Some believe that Annalisa was a prostitute, and she quickly took up with another man, sometimes even parading her new love in front of her old suitor. You can imagine the horror staff must have felt when they attended to Annalisa's room one day and found her dead in the bathtub, her throat slashed open and her head nearly severed from her body. Jealousy, or perhaps revenge, had been at the root of the murder. Others, however, don't believe this gruesome story, and instead believe that Annalisa and her gentleman suitor set themselves up at the Reed House Hotel. For a time they were happy, until it was her suitor who turned to other women and abandoned Annalisa at the hotel. In this version of the tale, poor Annalisa Netherly died of a heartbroken heart in room 311. There's a common thread with both accounts. Annalisa Netherly's ghost still haunts room 311, and she possesses a particular dislike of men, especially those who smoke. Uncomfortable sensations of being watched are the most commonly reported activity in room 311, in addition to the loud noises that wake guests at all hours of the night. Another Chattanooga urban legend is also attached to room 311, one that includes the famous gangster Al Capone as staying in this haunted room during his federal trial. As the story goes, Capone never mentioned having a run-in with the Reed House's resident spirit, but that security bars were placed on the window of room 311 to ensure that Capone could not escape the feds. Today, those security bars no longer exist. They were removed during renovations in 2004. One of the oldest hotels in Chicago's South Loop, the Congress Plaza Hotel has an unmatched vintage charm that attracts many locals and tourists alike. Plus, it's nestled among some of downtown Chicago's most iconic parks, museums, and other must-see attractions. It's also considered the most haunted hotel in the city. From eerie sights to unsettling noises, it's been enough to send some people packing early and some others even running out of their rooms in the middle of the night. Is it haunted? It would certainly seem so. Several rooms have since been closed off to the public, and one was even thoroughly sealed due to high levels of paranormal activity. In the ones still available, guests and staff report seeing ghostly figures, hearing faint ghostly voices, feeling cold spots, and seeing objects move across the room, sometimes forcefully, as if thrown from an unseen hand. Given all of the deaths that have occurred here, and all of the emotions from them, it's no surprise that there are spirits and a whole lot of otherworldly energy. The Shadow Man. In 1900, Captain Louis Ostheim was staying at the hotel the night before his wedding. Ostheim had served in the 1st United States Artillery during the Spanish-American War. As a veteran, he suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. This came in the form of night terrors, among other symptoms. That night, he awoke from a particularly brutal episode, and in his daze reached for his gun. Putting the barrel to his head, he pulled the trigger. Ever since, his spirit has been seen in many areas of the hotel. He appears as a shadowy figure that glides through the halls, often following guests and staff. It's speculated that Captain Lou may still be searching for the woman who he had planned to marry. Once he was spotted by a security guard who ended up chasing him all the way to the roof. By the time the breathless guard caught up, he'd simply vanished. The Ghost Boy. In 1939, a 43-year-old Jewish woman named Adele Langer came to the hotel with her two sons, 6-year-old Karl and 4-year-old Jan. They'd come to America, fleeing Nazi-occupied Czechoslovakia, and traveled to Chicago to be near a couple of Langer's aunts. Adele and her sons were waiting for Karl Sr. to join them, but after a few days, he still hadn't shown up. Days turned into weeks, and Langer became distraught. She also hadn't been able to find any work. All of that, plus the stress of having to leave her home and homeland so suddenly, eventually just overwhelmed her and drove her insane. One day, after taking the boys to the Lincoln Park Zoo, the woman opened the window to their room and hurled them both out onto the sidewalk below before leaping to her own death immediately after. Though all three bodies were found, the 6-year-old somehow never made it to the city morgue. It's thought that this is why he remains at the hotel, endlessly wandering the 12th floor. A security guard, who may or may not be the same one that chased down the Shadow Man, once reported seeing a young boy in worn-out clothes standing at the end of the hall. When he questioned the kid, Carol Jr. simply grinned at him and faded away right before his eyes. And many more. In 1904, an elevator operator fell 70 feet to the bottom of the elevator shaft, dying immediately and brutally on impact. 4 years later, a near-broke spendthrift named Roy Gormley shot himself in his room after paying the orchestra $500 to play George Handel's Dead March and buying drinks for all the musicians. In 1910, a man named James Kennedy checked in, went to his room, cut all the identification tags out of his clothes, burned all his papers, and shot himself. 6 years later, a mining investor named Morse Davis and his wife formed a suicide pact in room 312. They both ingested 2 cyanide capsules, though Mrs. Davis ultimately survived and wound up committed to a psychiatric hospital. In 1920, a man died of alcohol poisoning from poorly made moonshine. 6 years after that, a woman named Harriet Harrison also fell to her death down an empty elevator shaft from 6 stories up. In 1928, sloganeer G. Herb Palin, who coined the phrases safety first, died of a sudden heart attack in his room. About 20 years later, a longtime resident of the hotel who had a wooden right leg was having breakfast when he also suffered a heart attack. In 1950, a man named John Raymond shot the hotel's credit manager who had approached him about his $104 debt. Raymond then shot himself as well. Roughly 16 years later, an attorney named Frederick Hay was found dead in his room. He was butt naked, bound hand and foot with his own socks, and had been strangled with his own shirt. Sometime in the 1970s, a woman slit her wrists in one of the hotel bathtubs, and at some point, a taxi driver made a fatal leap out of an upper floor window. A salesman very deliberately flung himself down an empty elevator shaft, and a troubled family man hung himself from a cupboard hook. Many guests say they've seen the ghosts of these poor souls, mainly in the spots they died. The wooden-legged man in particular is likely the figure now well known as Peg Leg Johnny, who shows up in several places to make odd noises, push chairs around, slam doors, and mess with lights.